The massive doors of Lecture Hall 7 groaned open, their metallic screech echoing through the cavernous space. 200 cadets from across the galaxy sat in perfect formation, their various forms of attention focused on the empty platform. Below, Cepharians, with their crystalline exoskeletons, glinted under the harsh lighting, while crystalline beings pulsed with soft bioluminescence. The reptilian Vorthans sat motionless, their scaled hides reflecting the Academy's sterile walls. Low murmur rippled through the crowd as footsteps approached from the shadows behind the platform. The sound was uneven. Click, click, ash. Crag creating an ominous rhythm that silenced even the most restless cadets. Commander Vextel emerged from the darkness like a nightmare given form. What had once been a proud Zephyrian warrior now stood as a testament to the brutality of war. His natural 6 arms had been reduced to 4, with crude mechanical replacements grafted where flesh once grew. The left side of his carapace bore the telltale shine of synthetic armor plating, welded directly to his surviving bone structure. But it was his face that drew the most stares. Where clusters of compound eyes should have provided the panoramic vision his species was famous for, only empty sockets remained on the left side. Scar tissue had grown over the wounds in twisted patterns that spoke of multiple surgeries and incomplete healing. The support staff in his lower right hand scraped against the metal floor as he positioned himself at the center of the platform. For a full minute, he simply stood there, allowing the weight of his presence to settle over the young soldiers below. "Look at me." His voice cut through the silence like a rusted blade. The vocal cords that produced the sound had clearly been damaged, giving each word a harsh, grinding quality that made several cadets flinch. "Look closely, because this is what war with humans looks like when you survive it." A nervous crystalline in the front row shifted uncomfortably, her natural glow dimming as anxiety took hold. Vexel's remaining eye cluster fixed on her with predatory focus. "You've read the reports, haven't you?" He began pacing, his damaged leg creating that distinctive dragging sound with each step. "Clean tactical analysis, casualty statistics, or strategic overviews written by generals who never left their command ships." He stopped directly in front of the crystalline cadet who had caught his attention. "Me, cadet, what do your textbooks say about the human conflict?" The young being's form flickered with nervous energy. "The records state that humanity was successfully integrated into the Galactic Coalition following a brief military action. Minimal casualties on both sides, with human forces proving adequate but ultimately outmatched by superior coalition technology and tactics." Several cadets nodded in agreement. This was indeed what they had been taught at minor police action, against an upstart species that had gotten too aggressive in their expansion. Vexthal's mandibles spread wide, revealing rows of broken teeth that had never been properly repaired. The expression might have been a smile on another species, but on his scarred features, it looked more like a predator bearing fangs. "Minimal casualties," he repeated, the words dripping with bitter amusement. "Brief military action. ... He gestured to his ruined body with his remaining natural arms. "Does this look minimal to you?" The lecture hall had become so quiet that the hum of the ventilation system seemed deafeningly loud. Even the normally chatty Vorthan cadets sat in absolute stillness. Coalition won. "This much is true," Vextel continued, resuming his uneven pace across the platform. "But victory and defeat are not always what they seem when humans are involved. You see, humans have a concept that doesn't translate well into any of our languages. They call it Pyrrhic victory, winning a battle at such a cost that it might, as well, be defeat." He activated a holographic projector with a thought command sent through his neural implant. The image that materialized above the platform showed a mountainous landscape under alien skies. Jagged peaks stretched toward a red-tinged atmosphere, while strange vegetation clung to the rocky slopes. "Kepler 442b," Vexel announced. "A worthless rock in the outer rim, strategic value approaching 0. The humans had established a small mining colony. There may be 3,000 civilians working rare earths extraction." The hologram shifted, showing orbital bombardment patterns and troop movement indicators. Command decided to make an example. Show the humans what happened when they expanded without coalition approval. My battalion, 600 of the hegemony's finest soldiers, was tasked with securing the colony and taking prisoners for integration processing. A young Zephyrian cadet raised 2 arms in the traditional request, a speak gesture. Nodded acknowledgement. Sir, 600 soldiers against 3,000 civilians seems like massive overkill. Surely the humans surrendered immediately. The scarred veteran's remaining eye cluster focused on the questioner with laser intensity. That's exactly what we thought, Cadet. What we didn't understand is that humans don't see civilians and soldiers as separate categories when their homes are threatened.
How?
The hologram zoomed in on a narrow mountain pass, carved between 2 towering peaks. Ancient mining equipment was visible scattered around the area, along with prefabricated structures that had clearly seen better days. The colony's main access route ran through this pass. Standard military doctrine suggested a simple blockade cut off supplies and communication, wait for surrender. Clean, efficient, minimal bloodshed. Vextel's voice grew quieter, forcing. The cadets too strained forward to hear him. He landed at dawn on the 3rd day of the siege. The entire operation should have been finished by noon. He paused, his mechanical fingers drumming against his support staff in a rhythm that suggested, barely contained emotion. Instead, we met Sergeant Dongman. The holographic display flickered to life above the platform, casting eerie green shadows across the lecture hall. Commander Vextel's remaining eye cluster dilated as he stared at the projection, his mechanical fingers twitching involuntarily against his support staff. After Kepler 44-B, High Command reassigned my unit to the Verdant sector, he began, his damaged voice carrying a tremor that hadn't been there before. We thought we understood human tactics by then. We were wrong. The hologram showed a lush world covered in dense jungle canopy, with massive trees stretching toward a yellow sun. Thick vines connected the forest giants, creating a 3-dimensional maze of vegetation that seemed to pulse with alien life. Verdant 7 was supposed to be a simple mop-up operation, Vexel continued, his pacing becoming more agitated. Intelligence reports indicated a small human research station hidden somewhere in the equatorial jungle. Maybe 50 scientists and a handful of security personnel. My company of 200 soldiers would sweep the area, capture the humans, and secure any valuable research. A young crystalline cadet raised her appendage. Sir, 200 against 50 seems like overwhelming odds. What went wrong? Vextel's mandibles clicked in what might have been dark amusement. What went wrong was that we thought like civilized beings. We assumed that after 3 days of aerial bombardment and orbital scanning, any survivors would be cowering in their bunkers, ready to surrender. The holographic display shifted, showing flight patterns and heat signatures moving through the jungle canopy. Instead, we found that the humans had been watching us the entire time. They knew our landing zones, our patrol routes, our communication. Frequencies they had turned the entire jungle into a weapon. He gestured to the display, where red dots indicated coalition forces, while smaller blue dots moved through the trees around them. Captain J soon commanded their security detail, 37 humans against my entire company. On paper, it should have been over in hours. The projection zoomed in on a particularly dense section of jungle, where twisted vines and massive tree trunks created natural corridors and hiding spots. The humans didn't fight us directly. They used hit-and-run tactics, striking at our supply lines and communication equipment before vanishing back into the green maze. Vexel's voice grew quieter, forcing the cadets to lean forward. For 6 days, we chased shadows. My soldiers were dying from poisoned darts, hidden traps, and ambushes that seemed to come from nowhere. The jungle itself felt alive and hostile, as if the very trees were working against us. A Vorthan cadet interrupted, his scaled hide rippling with confusion. Sir, why didn't you simply burn the forest? Orbital bombardment could have cleared the entire area, Vextel replied, his remaining eye fixing on the questioner. High Command wanted the research station intact. The humans were working on something valuable, and the Coalition needed it undamaged. The veteran's mechanical fingers drummed against his staff as he continued. On the 7th day, I made the decision to retreat. My company had been reduced to 80 soldiers, and we were running low on ammunition and medical supplies. Standard military doctrine called for tactical withdrawal and regrouping. The holographic display showed coalition forces moving through the jungle in formation, their weapons raised and scanning for threats. We began our withdrawal at dawn, moving toward the designated extraction point 20 kilometers north of our position. Vexthel's voice became barely audible. That's when we learned what human persistence really means. The projection shifted to show the pursuing force a small group of figures moving through the jungle. With inhuman determination, Captain Jae-sung and his remaining squad followed us. Not just followed, they hunted us like our ancestors once. Hunted prey on the plains of Zephyria. For the first day, we maintained our lead, Vextel continued, his voice growing stronger with remembered fear. My soldiers were trained for this. Right. We knew how to move quickly through hostile territory, how to cover our tracks, how to evade pursuit. The hologram showed the distance between the two groups gradually decreasing, but humans don't follow the same rules as other species. While we stopped to rest during the hottest part of the day, they kept moving. While we set up defensive positions, for the night, they continued their pursuit in darkness. Koistaline cadet's bioluminescence flickered with confusion. Sir, how is that possible? Don't humans require sleep like most biological species? Vextel's mandibles spread in that disturbing smile. They took shifts. While 2 humans rested, the other 4 carried them on improvised stretchers. They rotated this way continuously, maintaining their pursuit speed even while individual members of their squad recovered. The projection showed the human squad moving through increasingly difficult terrain swamps filled with acidic water, cliff faces that required climbing equipment, and dense undergrowth that slowed normal movement to a crawl. By the 3rd day, they were eating things that would kill most galactic species, Vextel said, his voice filled with reluctant admiration. Local fruits, insects, even small predators they managed to catch. Their bodies adapted to toxins that should have sent them into shock. The hologram displayed a particularly harrowing scene. One of the human soldiers had been injured by a trap meant for the coalition forces. But instead of slowing down, his comrades had fashioned a carrier and continued their pursuit without missing a step. On the 5th day, we lost contact with the extraction team, Vextel continued. Later, we learned that Jae-sung had somehow circled around our position and eliminated the support squad waiting at the rendezvous point. The veteran's remaining eyes stared into the distance, seeing memories that the cadets couldn't share. Soldiers began to break down. The constant pressure, the knowledge that something was always following us, always getting closer. Some started hallucinating. Others simply stopped moving and had to be carried. By the 7th day, it was just me and 3 others, Vextel said quietly. We were hiding in a cave system, hoping the humans would pass us by. I remember thinking that surely they would give up, that no species could maintain such focus. For so long, the holographic display faded, leaving only the scarred veteran standing in the dim light of the lecture hall. That's when I heard footsteps outside the cave, slow, measured, patient. Captain Jae-sung appeared at the entrance like something from a nightmare. Vextel's mechanical fingers stopped their drumming. He was covered in mud and jungle growth, his uniform torn and stained with blood, but his eyes were completely calm. He looked at me like I was a problem he had finally gotten around to solving. The silence in the lecture hall was absolute. Even the ventilation system seemed to have stopped humming. He gave me water from his own canteen, Vextel whispered, treated my wounds with his medical supplies. Then he sat down across from me and said, "You're my prisoner now. You going to cause trouble, or can we do this the easy way?" A Vorthan cadet finally broke the silence. "That sounds almost ... merciful, sir." Vextel's laugh was like breaking glass. Merciful? That a human had tracked me across 2 continents through conditions that would have killed most species? Never stopping, never giving up, never showing mercy to my soldiers who fell behind. The veteran's remaining eyes swept across the assembled cadets. But when he finally caught me, he treated me with dignity. That's what makes humans so terrifying. They can hunt you to the ends of the galaxy with absolute determination, but they never lose their sense of right and wrong. He leaned heavily on his support staff. It's not mindless savagery, cadets. It's something far worse. It's calculated, patient, and completely unstoppable. When a human decides to chase you, they don't stop because they're tired or hungry or scared. They stop when they catch you, or when they're dead. The holographic projector shut down with a soft hum, leaving the lecture hall in normal lighting. But somehow, the shadows seemed deeper than before. The lecture hall felt different on the third day, where excited chatter had once filled the space. Before Commander Vexel's arrival, now only hushed whispers echoed through the cavernous room. The cadets sat with straighter postures, their various forms of attention more focused than before. Word had spread through the academy about the scarred veterans' previous accounts, and even the most arrogant young officers now understood they were hearing something unprecedented. Vexel limped onto the platform with his usual uneven gait, but today his remaining eye cluster seemed duller, as if the memories he was about to share had drained something vital from his core. He positioned himself at the center of the stage and stood motionless for several long moments, his mechanical fingers tapping against his support staff in an increasingly frantic rhythm. "Yesterday I told you about human persistence," he began, his damaged voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "Today, I will tell you about human creativity, and why that terrifies me more than their ability to hunt across galaxies." The veteran activated the holographic projector. Suddenly, the space above the platform filled with the massive image of a space station, unlike anything the cadets had ever seen. Titan Station stretched 4 kilometers in every direction, its hull bristling with defensive turrets, shield generators, and docking bays large enough to accommodate entire fleets. "Titan Station," Vexel announced, gesturing toward the projection with one of his remaining natural arms. "The crown jewel of coalition military engineering. Lao. 12 layers of overlapping defensive systems, each one capable of stopping a full battle fleet. Supply lines that stretched across 3 sectors, bringing in everything from ammunition to fresh food. A garrison of 50,000 coalition soldiers from 17 different species." A young crystalline cadet raised her appendage. "It looks absolutely massive. How could anyone possibly assault such a fortress?" Vexel's mandibles clicked in dark amusement. "That's exactly what we thought." High Command had designated Titan Station as the primary staging area for the final push into human space. Every strategic simulation showed it was untouchable. The hologram shifted, showing smaller human vessels approaching the station like insects swarming a giant predator. The humans launched what appeared to be a desperate suicide attack. 300 ships against our defensive network. We shot down 270 of them before they could even reach our outer perimeter. The display zoomed in on the battle, showing explosions flowering across the void as human vessels were systemically destroyed by the station's overwhelming firepower. The remaining 30 ships managed to breach our hull in what we assumed was their final act of defiance. We expected maybe 1,000 human soldiers at most. Vexel's voice grew quieter, forcing the cadets to lean forward in their seats. Instead, we found ourselves with 2,000 human troops scattered throughout the station's interior levels. They had packed their ships with soldiers instead of weapons or supplies. No heavy artillery, no siege equipment, just humans and whatever they could carry. A Vorthan cadet's scaled hide rippled with confusion. "How, sir? That sounds like military suicide. How could infantry troops possibly threaten such a fortified position?" The scarred veteran's remaining eye fixed on the questioner with laser intensity. "Because you're still thinking like a civilized being. You assume that weapons are built in factories, that tools have specific purposes, that technology can only be used as originally designed." The holographic display shifted dramatically, now showing the interior of the station in cross-section. Corridors, chambers, and technical sections were highlighted in different colors, creating a 3-dimensional map of the massive structure. "The humans didn't try to fight us conventionally," Vexel continued, his mechanical fingers drumming faster against his staff. "Instead, they disappeared into the maintenance sections, the utility tunnels, the areas of the station that we barely paid attention to because they weren't strategically important." The projection began highlighting specific sections of the station in pulsing red. Engineer Hyjin was the first one we identified. She had been a civilian water treatment specialist before the war, responsible for maintaining purification systems on human colonies. The display zoomed in on the station's water recycling facility, showing a complex network of pipes, filters, and processing chambers. Within 3 days, she had turned our entire water distribution system into a chemical weapon delivery network. The purification chemicals that were supposed to make water safe to drink became compounds that could blind, disorient, or incapacitate anyone who consumed them. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats as the implications became clear. Every living being on the station required water to survive. Technician Wusiok had worked on gravity generation systems for human mining operations. Vextel continued, the projection now showing the massive spinning rings that created artificial gravity throughout the station. He rewired the gravity generators to create localized fields of crushing force in specific corridors. The hologram demonstrated the effect, showing coalition soldiers being suddenly pressed to the floor by forces that could reach up to 15 times normal gravity. My troops would be walking through a corridor normally, and suddenly find themselves unable to move as the artificial gravity spiked. Some were crushed instantly, so others were trapped until they suffocated under their own weight. A young Zephyrian's carapace clicked nervously. Sir, how is such modification possible? Gravity generators have multiple safety systems to prevent exactly that kind of malfunction. Vextel's mandibles spread in that disturbing smile. Safety systems designed by civilized beings who assumed no one would want to weaponize basic life support equipment? Humans don't see safety systems as protection. They see them as challenges to overcome. The projection shifted again, now showing the station's medical bay filled with sophisticated equipment and surgical units. Dr. Su Young had been a battlefield medic, trained to keep human soldiers alive under impossible conditions. Her specialty was medical nanites, microscopic robots designed to repair tissue damage and fight infection. The display zoomed in to show tiny mechanical constructs moving through what appeared to be the station's ventilation system. She reprogrammed her medical nanites into a surveillance network. Millions of microscopic robots spread throughout the station, reporting back on our troop movements, our tactical discussions, even our private conversations. The veteran's remaining eyes stared into the distance as he continued. We couldn't plan any operation without the humans knowing about it in advance. They seemed to anticipate our every move, always staying one step ahead of our forces. Vextel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But Lieutenant Kyung Ho was the one who nearly killed me. The holographic display now showed what appeared to be a workshop area filled with discarded equipment, spare parts, and what looked like random debris. He had been an electronics engineer before the war, specializing in quantum communication systems. The kind of person who could look at any piece of technology and understand how it worked. The projection focused on a strange device that seemed to be assembled from completely unrelated components. In 4 hours, using nothing but salvaged parts from our own communication array, some spare wiring, and what appeared to be toy components from the station's recreation area, he built a directed energy weapon capable of cutting through military-grade armor plating. Vextel touched his synthetic chest plates with his mechanical hand, a gesture that sent an audible click through the silent lecture hall. I was leading a squad through Sector 7 when the wall next to me simply disappeared. No explosion. No warning, just gone. The beam continued through 3 more bulkheads before finally dissipating. A young Zephyrian cadet whispered, "Impossible." The scarred veteran's remaining eye cluster swiveled to focus on the speaker with predatory intensity. I said exactly the same thing as I watched my internal organs spill onto the deck plating. My medical team spent 6 months rebuilding my torso, replacing organs that had been vaporized by a weapon that shouldn't have been able to exist. Ah! I get op do I get. You see, humans don't recognize the word impossible. When faced with a problem they can't solve with available resources, they don't give up. They look at that limitation and ask themselves, how can I turn this into an opportunity? The holographic display now showed dozens of improvised weapons and devices, scattered throughout the station, explosive charges built from cleaning supplies, communication jammers constructed from kitchen equipment, defensive barriers made from furniture and medical equipment. For 6 months, 2,000 humans held 50,000 coalition soldiers hostage inside our own fortress, Svextol concluded, his voice filled with reluctant admiration. They turned every system in the station against us, weaponized equipment that was never meant for combat, and created an environment where we were afraid to drink water, walk through corridors, or even breathe the air. The veteran deactivated the holographic projector, leaving the lecture hall in normal lighting that somehow seemed dimmer than before. That, cadets, is what human creativity looks like when applied to warfare. They don't just adapt to impossible situations, they turn impossibility itself into a weapon. The fourth session began in complete silence. As Commander Vextel limped onto the platform, the cadets noticed something different about the scarred veteran. His usual mechanical clicking against the support staff was absent, and his remaining eye cluster seemed dimmer than before, as if the memories he was about to share had drained the very light from his being. Behind him, a massive memorial wall materialized through holographic projection. Thousands upon thousands of names scrolled across its surface in the flowing script of various coalition languages, Zephyrian glyphs mixed with crystalline light patterns and Vorthan scale marks, creating a tapestry of loss that seemed to stretch into infinity. 57,436 names, Vextel whispered, his damaged voice barely carrying to the front row. Coalition soldiers who died in what High Command called the final victory. Every one of them had families, hopes, dreams of returning home when the war ended. He stood motionless for a full minute, allowing the weight of the memorial to sink into the consciousness of every cadet present. Some of the younger beings began to shift uncomfortably, but none dared break the silence. New Soul, the veteran finally continued, his voice gaining strength. The last major human stronghold? 30 million civilians crammed into a sprawling metropolis that stretched from the mountains to the sea. Intelligence reports indicated maybe 50,000 human soldiers scattered throughout the city's defensive positions. The holographic memorial dissolved, replaced by an orbital view of a massive urban center that seemed to pulse with life even from space. Towering spires reached toward the sky while endless residential districts spread outward like organic growth. Transportation networks crisscrossed the city in complex patterns, carrying millions of beings through their daily lives. The Galactic Council had given us the moral authority to end human resistance once and for all, Vextel said, his mechanical fingers beginning their familiar drumming against his staff. Every legal justification, every diplomatic precedent, supported our action. Humanity had been offered generous terms of surrender multiple times, and had rejected them all. A young crystalline cadet raised her appendage hesitantly. Sir, with such overwhelming numbers and orbital superiority, surely the humans recognize the futility of continued resistance. Vexel's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter laughter. That's exactly what we thought. Our battle plan was simple and clean. Disable the planetary shields with orbital bombardment, land our forces at strategic points throughout the city, and accept the inevitable surrender within 72 hours. The hologram shifted to show the first phase of the assault. Massive coalition battleships hung in orbit like predatory beasts, their weapon systems charging with deadly energy. Below them, the city's defensive shields shimmered with rainbow patterns as they absorbed the incoming fire. The shields fell on schedule after 18 hours of continuous bombardment. Vexel continued, his voice taking on a mechanical quality as if he were reciting from a military report. Commenced with the deployment of 300,000 coalition troops to secure key infrastructure and government facilities. The display now showed transport ships descending through the atmosphere like a metallic rain, disgorging thousands of soldiers onto landing zones throughout the city. From orbit, it looked like a textbook military operation executed with precision, an overwhelming force. We expected to find cowering civilians and demoralized defenders ready to throw down their weapons, the veterans said quietly. Instead, we walked into something that defied every principle of civilized warfare. The holographic views zoomed in on street level, where coalition soldiers were advancing through urban environments that seemed strangely alive with activity. Windows that should have been empty suddenly erupted with weapons fire. Rooftops that appeared abandoned became sniper positions. Even children's playgrounds had been converted into fortified strongpoints. The first thing we noticed was that there were no non-combatants. Vexthel's voice grew hollow with remembered shock. In every other siege we had conducted, civilian populations would gather in designated safe zones, displaying white flags, and waiting for protection. In New Seoul, every human we encountered was armed and fighting. A Vorthan cadet interrupted, his scaled hide rippling with confusion. Sir, surely children weren't participating in combat operations. The Geneva Conventions clearly state human children don't read Galactic Council regulations. Vexthel cut him off sharply. 12-year-old Jinnah had been trained to operate anti-aircraft systems by her older brother, who died in the orbital bombardment. When we breached her building's defenses, we found her at a jury-rigged plasma cannon that she had been firing continuously for 18 hours. The hologram showed surveillance footage of a small human child, barely visible behind the massive weapon she was operating. Her movements were precise and deadly as she tracked coalition fighters across the sky, shooting down aircraft with shots that would have challenged veteran gunners. 47 confirmed kills, Vexel whispered. A child who should have been playing with toys instead destroyed 47 military aircraft piloted by experienced coalition warriors. The scarred veteran's remaining eye cluster fixed on each cadet in turn. When our assault squad finally reached her position, she looked at them with eyes that held no fear. She smiled, said something in the human language that our translators couldn't parse, and detonated the weapon's power core. Several cadets flinched as the hologram showed the explosion that consumed an entire city block. She took 12 of my soldiers with her, 12 veterans who had survived battles across 3 sectors, killed by a human child who chose death over surrender. The projection shifted to show coalition forces advancing through what appeared to be a medical district. Hospital buildings rose on either side of the street, their Red Cross markings clearly visible even through the smoke and debris of battle. Grandmother Malsoon was 87 years old, Vexel continued, his voice becoming barely audible. She had spent her entire life as a teacher, educating human children in mathematics and literature. When the war began, she volunteered to help care for wounded soldiers in the city's hospitals. The hologram focused on security footage from inside a coalition command center. Soldiers from various species were gathered around tactical displays, planning the next phase of their assault. The scene looked routine, professional, exactly what one would expect from a military operation. She walked into our temporary command post carrying a basket of what appeared to be medical supplies. The veteran said, his mechanical fingers stopping their drumming entirely. Our sensors detected no weapons, no explosives, no threat of any kind. She was just an elderly human offering to help treat our wounded. The footage showed the small, frail figure approaching the command staff with slow, careful steps. Her wrinkled face bore the kind smile that spoke of a lifetime spent caring for others. Several coalition officers turned to acknowledge her presence, their body language relaxed and welcoming. She looked directly at me and said, "I'm sorry about this, dear. Please tell my students that their teacher kept her promise." Vextel's voice cracked as he continued. Then she smiled, the most beautiful, peaceful smile I have ever seen, and triggered the explosives she had surgically implanted in her own body. The hologram went white as the blast consumed the command center. When the image cleared, nothing remained but twisted metal and scattered debris where moments before had stood the finest military minds of 3 species. My entire general staff, the veteran whispered. Decades of combined military experience, strategic brilliance that had won campaigns across the galaxy, was all destroyed by a grandmother who had turned herself into a living weapon. A young Zephyrian cadet's carapace was clicking rapidly with, "Distress? Sir? How could anyone make such a sacrifice? What could possibly motivate such extreme action?" Vextel's remaining eye focused on the questioner with laser intensity. That's what we couldn't understand. Kept expecting human morale to break, for their leaders to see reason and order surrender. Instead, resistance only intensified as our casualties mounted. A holographic display now showed a heavily damaged section of the city where coalition forces had established a fortified position. Rubble-strewn streets stretched in every direction, punctuated by the smoking hulks of destroyed vehicles and the occasional flash of weapons fire from hidden positions. Captain Taman commanded the human forces in Sector 12, Vextel said, his voice gaining a note of reluctant respect. He had been wounded 3 times during the siege, lost half his unit to our orbital strikes, and was defending a position that any rational military commander would have abandoned days earlier. The projection zoomed in on a partially collapsed building where human soldiers had carved out defensive positions among the debris. Their equipment was clearly makeshift, their uniforms torn and stained with blood. But their weapons remained steady, and their movements coordinated. I personally led the assault on his position, the veteran continued. We had overwhelming numerical superiority, heavy weapon support, and complete control of the surrounding area. When we breached their final defensive line, I expected to find broken soldiers ready to surrender. The hologram shifted to show the interior of the ruined building, where a small group of humans had taken cover behind improvised barricades. At their center stood a figure whose uniform bore the insignia of command, despite being torn and bloodied beyond recognition. Captain Taman was barely conscious from blood loss, Vextel said quietly. He was leaning against a wall because he could no longer stand without support. His remaining soldiers were wounded, exhausted, and completely surrounded. The scarred veteran's mandibles began clicking rapidly as he reached the climax of his account. I offered him the standard terms of surrender. Medical treatment for his wounded prisoner of war status under Galactic Council protocols honorable. Treatment for his surviving soldiers. The silence in the lecture hall was absolute as every cadet waited for the conclusion of the story. Captain Taman looked at me with eyes that held no defeat, no despair, no recognition that his cause was hopeless, Vextel whispered. He straightened as much as his wounds would allow, raised his weapon with hands that should have been too weak to hold it, and said 3 words that will haunt me until I die. The veteran's remaining eyes swept across the assembled cadets, each one hanging on his every word. Come and take it. The holographic display faded to black, leaving only the scarred figure of Commander Vextel standing in the harsh light of the lecture hall. We won that battle, he concluded, his voice filled with hollow victory. 57,000 coalition casualties to defeat a force 1/10 our size. It was the most expensive victory in galactic military history, and it felt like the most crushing defeat any of us had ever experienced. On the final day, Commander Vextel looked like a broken shell of his former self. The scarred veteran who had once commanded respect through fear now appeared fragile, almost ghostly, synthetic. Armor plates seemed heavier than before, and his remaining eye cluster had dimmed to barely a flicker. The weight of 5 days of reliving nightmares had bent his already damaged frame, till he moved like an ancient being carrying the sins of entire civilizations. The lecture hall was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread throughout the Galactic Military Academy about the veterans' accounts, and cadets from every branch of service had crowded into the space. Some sat in the aisles, others stood pressed against the walls, all united by the terrible fascination of hearing truths that no official report had ever contained. Vextel shuffled to the center of the platform with movements that suggested each step caused him physical pain. His mechanical fingers, usually drumming against his support staff, now gripped it with desperate intensity as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. 20 years, he began, his damaged voice barely carrying beyond the front rows. 23 years since the Treaty of Centauri Prime was signed. 23 years since humanity officially surrendered to the Galactic Coalition. 23 years since we declared total victory over an entire species. The veteran activated the holographic projector one final time, and the space above the platform filled with a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of points of light represented star systems, trade routes, and coalition assets spread across the spiral arms of their cosmic home. Look at it, Vextel said, gesturing weakly toward the display. The greatest civilization in galactic history. 437 species united under one banner. Trade flowing freely between worlds. Peace maintained through superior firepower and diplomatic wisdom. Red dots began appearing throughout the galaxy map, marking coalition military bases, research stations, mining operations, and patrol routes. The sheer scope of their civilization was breathtaking, a network of interconnected worlds spanning millions of light years. By every measure that matters, we won, the veteran continued, his voice gaining a bitter edge. Earth's surface was occupied. Human colonies were placed under coalition administration. Their military was disbanded and their leaders imprisoned or executed. The human threat was eliminated permanently. Young crystalline cadet raised her appendage hesitantly. Sir, if the victory was so complete, why do you sound like we lost? Vextel's remaining eye fixed on her with an intensity that made several nearby cadets shift uncomfortably. Because victory and defeat are not always what they appear to be when humans are involved. The holographic display began highlighting specific locations throughout the galaxy, each one marked with pulsing orange warnings, supply convoys vanishing in deep space, research stations going dark without explanation, garrison commanders filing reports about equipment failures, personnel disappearing, and incidents that make no logical sense. The projection zoomed in on a remote mining facility in the Outer Rim territories. The station appeared normal from the outside, a standard coalition mining platform designed to extract rare minerals from asteroid fields. But the emergency beacon flashing from its position told a different story. Mining Station Omega-7 suffered what appeared to be a complete system cascade failure last month, Vextel said, his mechanical fingers beginning their familiar drumming. Power grid collapsed, life support failed, communication systems went dead. When the rescue team arrived, they found something interesting. The hologram shifted to show security footage from inside the station. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through corridors that should have been bustling with activity, but were instead completely empty. Every single member of the crew had vanished, the veteran continued. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened. But the security cameras had recorded something fascinating in the final hours before the system failure. The footage showed a figure moving through sections of the station that should have been impossible to access. The person wore a standard environmental suit, but their movements were too fluid, too purposeful for a panicked crew member. They seemed to know exactly where they were going and what they needed to do. The figure was human-sized, Vextel whispered. It moved through areas that required specialized access codes, bypassed security systems that should have been impossible to defeat, and systematically disabled critical infrastructure with the precision of someone who had studied the station's blueprints for years. A Vorthan cadet's scaled hide rippled with confusion. Sir, how could a human have access to such detailed information about coalition facilities? The war ended decades ago. The scarred veteran's mandibles clicked in dark amusement. That's what we kept asking ourselves. Until 6 months ago, when Admiral Carthon's flagship experienced a similar incident. The holographic display shifted to show a massive coalition battleship, one of the newest and most advanced vessels in the fleet. The ship was passing through what appeared to be empty space, its navigation systems operating normally, when suddenly, every screen throughout the vessel went dark. The ship was transiting through the Terran quarantine zone. Vexel continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. A routine patrol mission through space that had been declared clear of all human presence for over 2 decades. The projection showed the moment when the ship's systems came back online. But instead of normal operational displays, every screen throughout the vessel showed the same message in simple text. Dong-Su remembers Kepler 44 to be. Several cadets gasped as they recognized the name from Vextel S's first lecture. The human sergeant, who had held the mountain pass against impossible odds, would become the veteran's introduction to human determination. The message remained on every screen for exactly 72 hours, Vextel said quietly. It's same amount of time that Sergeant Dong-Su held his position against my battalion. Then it vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving no trace in the ship's computer systems. The holographic display began showing dozens of similar incidents scattered throughout coalition space. Equipment failures that followed patterns, suggesting intelligent sabotage. Personnel disappearances that left no evidence but occurred at strategically important facilities. Psychological warfare operations that seemed designed to remind coalition forces that they were being watched. We started calling them ghost attacks, the veteran continued, his remaining eyes staring into the distance as if seeing threats that others could not perceive. Incidents that couldn't be explained by normal mechanical failure or enemy action. But that seemed to follow patterns suggesting coordinated intelligence. The projection zoomed out to show the galaxy as a whole, with incident markers appearing in clusters that followed no immediately apparent logic. But as more data appeared, a pattern began to emerge. The attacks were centered around systems that had once been human colonies or had strategic importance during the war. The children of Earth are growing up, Vexthal said, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and reluctant admiration. Some returned to their shattered worlds to rebuild what we destroyed. But others, others disappeared into the darkness between stars. A young Zephyrian cadet raised multiple arms in the traditional gesture for urgent questioning. Sir, are you suggesting that humans are still conducting military operations against the Coalition? That would be a violation of the Surrender Treaty. Vexthal's laugh was like breaking glass. Treaties are documents signed by governments, young one. Governments can be destroyed, leaders can be killed, and entire civilizations can be conquered. What you cannot destroy is the memory of a species that refuses to forget. The holographic display now showed a time-lapse of the galaxy over the past 23 years. Coalition expansion continued steadily, new worlds were colonized, trade routes were established, and the great machine of galactic civilization ground forward with apparently unstoppable momentum, but scattered throughout the display. Like pinpricks of darkness in the light, the ghost attacks continued. Never enough to threaten coalition supremacy, never coordinated enough to suggest organized resistance, but persistent enough to serve as a constant reminder that something was watching from the void. Every human we killed had a name. Vexthal said, his voice becoming stronger as he approached his final point. Every human we killed had family, friends, comrades who survived to remember them. Every human we killed left behind someone who would carry their memory like a weapon. The veteran's remaining eyes swept across the packed lecture hall, taking in the faces of cadets who had entered his lectures as confident young officers and would leave as beings who understood that victory was not always what it appeared to be. We thought we were fighting for territory, for resources, for the expansion of galactic civilization, he continued. But humans weren't fighting for any of those things. They were fighting for each other. And when you kill someone that a human loves, you create an enemy who will never stop, never forgive, and never forget. The holographic display faded to black, leaving only the scarred figure of Commander Vexthal standing in the harsh light of the lecture hall. The war is over, but the humans are coming home. They spent 2 decades learning from us, studying our technology, understanding our weaknesses, and preparing for something that none of us can predict. He began gathering his notes with movements that suggested profound exhaustion. I stand before you not to teach you how to fight humans that war is finished. I stand before you to help you understand what it means when an entire species refuses to break, refuses to surrender, and refuses to stop caring about the dead. As the cadets began filing out of the lecture hall in subdued silence, many of them casting nervous glances at the shadows as if expecting human figures to emerge from the darkness, Vexthal remained on the platform. His remaining eyes stared at the space where the holographic memorial had appeared on the first day. Seeing the names of coalition soldiers who had died believing they were fighting for a just cause. But now, in the empty lecture hall with only the hum of ventilation systems for company, the old veteran wondered if those soldiers had died for victory, or if they had simply died as the first payment in a debt that would take generations to settle, somewhere in the vast galaxy. In hidden bases and forgotten stations, in the spaces between stars where no coalition patrol would ever think to look. The children of Earth were growing up. They were learning skills that their parents had died to protect, remembering names that the coalition had tried to erase, and preparing for a future that no strategic analyst could predict. Vextal's mandibles clicked one final time as he whispered. The words that had haunted him for 23 years. Words that would haunt him until his dying day. Humanity doesn't forget. Humanity doesn't forgive. Humanity just waits. In the darkness between stars, something was stirring. And when it was ready, when the time was right, when the children of Earth had grown into the inheritors of their parents' memories, they would come home. The war was over. But the reckoning had only just begun. The end.